Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Good, bad, and crazy martinis for you today. And Jim, each year you and I do our year-end awards, and some of those awards and predictions turn out to be very prescient, and others don't turn out to be very prescient at all. For example, my choice of Mike Gallagher as the rising star in politics from late last year, not panning out so great.
He did rise, just very like a Roman candle, right? Just really quickly and brightly. And then he's got other stuff he wants to do.
And your choice last year for most honest political figure was Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman, a choice that very few of us would have expected just even a few months before that, given the whole flap over dress code on the Senate floor. But then once his response came out to the Hamas terrorism against Israel and so forth, he's at least suggested we need a better approach for national security at the border. And now he's speaking out against squatting, which we've talked about a couple times on the podcast. In an interview with the New York Post, which most Democrats also don't do, Fetterman ripping the idea of squatters' rights, saying squatters have no rights, saying he dealt with this as mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania. Quote, how can you even pretend that this is anything other than you're just breaking the law? He's also very much against the coddling of criminals. He says he's gone to police funerals. You know, if the people who killed the NYPD detective a couple of weeks back is convicted, he should spend the rest of his life in prison and never have an opportunity to get out. And so common sense stuff that I think most Democrats a generation ago probably would have agreed with. But when it's this day and age, and the Democrats don't want to really get in the face of hardened criminals because apparently they're the real victims in society, Jim, it's kind of refreshing to see comments like this.
Yeah, look, squatting and the rules and laws for eviction vary a great deal from state to state. I don't necessarily have experience with what we consider to be a traditional squatter like we're hearing about now. But a couple of years ago, we moved, found the perfect house here in Fairfax County, went to buy it, needed to sell our old house. The housing market was very slow. So we rented it out. We rented it out to a guy who, without going into too much detail, turned out to be a drug dealer. And I know it's going to shock you, Greg, but they're not always reliable about paying rent. Even though you'd think they have a reliable source of income, you know, people love drugs. As an old joke from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Look, I don't really need to sell drugs. The drugs sell themselves. But shockingly enough, this person did not pay. After a month or two, stopped paying rent, and you know all the various steps that we would take to say, hey, I don't, you know, and we heard every possible excuse. My mom is sick, blah blah blah. So we go to eviction court. Thankfully, in the state of Virginia, I think you only needed like 2 months or maybe 3 months of unpaid rent to say, okay, this person can be evicted. This person had previously lived in Florida, and my understanding is that in the state of Florida, you have to go a year of unpaid rent before you can evict somebody. All of this comes out with this desire to avoid poor families going through a hard time from getting evicted from a, you know, Scrooge McDuck style landlord. And yeah, nobody likes to see somebody get evicted, but when you don't pay your rent, your landlord is entirely within their rights to evict you. At least that's how I see it. Various states have, you know, different laws, and a lot of them, they're basically, you have to go a long period. And if you're in circumstances like ours, where you're effectively trying to pay 2 mortgages, this can really financially ruin you. So this, the entire idea of, oh, these poor squatters and things like that. No, these people really, like, you very much like student loans. You signed a contract. You made an agreement to pay a certain amount. If you stop paying them, then you should not. And in the case of a lot of these squatters, they never paid anything. They just, somebody has a second house, they see an unoccupied property, they move in, change the locks, and decide, I own this now, and you can't get me out. And it's actually, I'm kind of surprised we have not heard more stories about these kinds of disputes leading to violence. God bless John Fetterman for taking this stance. And if people are wondering, why are we seeing what feels like a surge in complaints and observations about squatters, I had this thought. I mentioned it in the Morning Jolt. It was very much inspired by our conversations on this podcast. You add up the total number of migrants who have crossed the border without permission, illegally, been encountered by Customs and Border Patrol, and say, I'm seeking asylum. You go from like 2019, which is a little bit before Biden, but nonetheless, you know, the last 5 years or so, it's gone up by about 5 million. So basically about 1 million people a year who are brought into the country. They did not enter with permission. They're seeking asylum. They might get it, they might not. Remember, some of these folks are getting court dates down in 2033 Apparently the average wait is like 4.5 years, but still there are other ones where it's 6 years, and as you saw, close to 9 years. They're in this legal limbo where they can stay in the country for now, and they won't get their issue resolved for another 4, 5, even 9 years. They need a place to stay, and most of these folks did not come here with tons of money. They usually came here with the suitcase and the shirts on their back. Where did the Biden administration think you could add 1 million people a year and not, like, where are they going to live? Who's going to feed them? Who's going to clothe them? Some of these people can work, but some of them can't. They're asylum seekers. They don't really have, they don't have legal status of, I'm in this country legally. But they're not quite illegal either because they haven't decided, no, you have a implausible or non-justifiable claim to asylum. So I kind of wonder if illegal immigration and the wave that we have seen under the Biden years is one of the things that's exacerbating this problem of squatters, which further explains why the vast majority of Democratic senators or Democratic lawmakers anywhere just don't want to talk about it because it calls attention to the problem at the border and the problems of the Biden administration's approach to immigration as a whole.
No, I think you're right about that. And Jim, I'm glad that Virginia law was such that you could act pretty quickly when your tenant didn't pay rent. In your situation, I assume you actually had a lease with the guy. In some of these places, it's just like you said, if there's a second property.
Somebody moved into your vacation home and they're just living there now.
Exactly. And Fetterman addresses that too. It's wild. He says that you go away on a long trip for 30 days or something and someone breaks into your home and suddenly they have rights. That is crazy. Like if somebody stole your car and then they held it for 30 days, then somehow they now have some rights. So good for him on this. Somebody saying he's getting red pilled on some stuff. I still want to see him actually take a strong stand on some real votes. But in terms of public statements, he's definitely turned out to be a better senator than I think a lot of us expected. So keep it up, Senator, and feel free to vote that way when the issues come up as well. Well, John Fetterman is certainly turning out to be a pleasant surprise on a number of issues, and I'll tell you what else is going to be a pleasant surprise. All the deals you see at 4patriots.com/martini. That's where you need to head, where you'll see a lot of great deals, including last chance deals on the Patriot Pure items, including the UV phone sanitizer, the UV wand, the sanitation solution machine, and the disinfecting power bank. But the big news over there at 4patriots.com/martini, the return of the deluxe 3-month survival food kits. They were sold out for more than a year. Now they are back with exclusive recipes on things like pancakes, mac and cheese, Aztec chili, potato soup, spaghetti, lasagna, and more. 688 total servings per kit, or just under 8 per day. You just don't know when emergencies are going to happen, so be ready with the survival food kits. You can stash food away and be confident that when a disaster strikes, you and your family will be ready. Go to 4patriots.com/martini to get the deluxe 3-month survival food kit and the peace of mind you deserve. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. That's the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. And yesterday, Donald Trump decided to officially wade into the abortion debate. Gave about a 4 or 5 minute video statement. The first almost minute and a half of it dealt with IVF because after the Alabama Supreme Court decision, he and other Republicans think that is a losing issue unless they're very, very clear about it. So now he's fully in favor of IVF. I think there are some moral issues about leftover embryos and so forth that ought to be addressed, but he's certainly trying to put that behind the Republican Party. And then on the larger issue of abortion, 2 clips here. First of all, mostly accurately saying that the real radicals on the issue of abortion are the Democrats.
It must be remembered that the Democrats are the radical ones on this position because they support abortion up to and even beyond the 9th month. The concept of having an abortion in the later months and even execution after birth, and that's exactly what it is. The baby is born, the baby is executed after birth, is unacceptable, and almost everyone agrees with that.
Yeah, the Senate has rejected medical care being mandatory for infants who survive abortion. Some abortionists, like Kermit Gosnell, will actually strangle or use scissors or forceps to stab the baby to death, which is just horrific in every conceivable way. Others will simply leave them exposed and refuse to give them medical attention and let them die due to neglect. And then here's what he had to say on the issue of abortion itself. He says the federal government doesn't have a role, like the Supreme Court said. It should be up to the states.
My view is now that we have abortion where everybody wanted it from a legal standpoint, the states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land. In this case, the law of the state. Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people. You must follow your heart, or in many cases, your religion or your faith. Do what's right for your family and do what's right for yourself. Do what's right for your children. Do what's right for our country and vote. So important to vote. At the end of the day, it's all about will of the people. That's where we are right now, and that's what we want, the will of the people.
Well, there he goes with the always lousy Disney movie philosophy of just follow your heart and everything's going to be fine. I would definitely not agree with that. And so he's basically admitting that if states go hardcore blue, like New York, like California, where they're actually debating whether infants who survive abortions ought to survive, well, that's what they've decided. Other people pointing out, pro-life activists saying, there's got to be some standard. Murder needs to be illegal. A lot of people saying this is just Trump pragmatism. He never really cared about the issue. He's just trying to make it as less of a liability as possible because the Democrats seem to have gained a political advantage from it since the end of Roe. So, Jim, what do you make of Trump, and what do you have to say here?
Well, first of all, Greg, let's contemplate the cojones it takes to declare abortion is now where everybody wanted from a legal standpoint. Really? No. I think legally, almost nobody's happy with this because if you're, a pro-lifer, you want your ideal will be 0 abortions in the country, or maybe just exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother. And, in many blue states, it's not only legal, but there's an ever expanding amount of taxpayer funding for abortions. Mm-hmm. People, saying we're going to cover the cost to women who are in states where it's been banned to get to states where it's not been banned. If you're pro-choice, you're really angry at the red states. You can't believe that there are parts of this country where it is very difficult to procure an abortion. So I think nobody's happy now, but maybe, and maybe that's way the way things have to be. But I kind of know what he's talking about. Will of the people. Look, for a lot of people, including, I suspect, a lot of listeners to this podcast, will of the people, on a matter of life and death, the will of the people actually doesn't matter. It does not matter if 51% of the people believe that something that is morally wrong ought to be legal. In their eyes, this is not something you can negotiate about. This is not something you can accept half a loaf on. Now, I do think if you look at this politically, public opinion is not where pro-lifers need it to be. And it may well be that the sheer number of red states where having it largely banned in the red states and big chunks of the middle of the country in the South, and largely legal in the blue states up in the Northeast, upper Midwest, and West Coast, that may be as good as it can get for the pro-life movement, at least for now. I do feel like the pro-life, I'm not going to say the pro-life movement, I'm going to say pro-life politicians, the elected officials have really fumbled the ball since Roe v. Wade, because this was the time to roll in and say, okay, we're going to finance crisis pregnancy centers. We're going to do everything we can to make it easier for those who find themselves with an unwanted pregnancy to say, you know what? I love this child. I'm going to try to do my best to raise this child, even though it was not something I planned. And this is something that's very frightening and very scary. Like, you could have done that. And largely Republicans did not do that. And I think in a whole bunch of cases, including arguably in the state of Florida, people pushed for bans that went to close to 6 weeks, when I think in a lot of places you could get public opinion to about 15 weeks, but not beyond. And I think sometimes, my attitude is always move the ball in the right direction. And if you have to take incremental steps, that's what you got to do. And to me, that strikes me as the reasonable process to get to the point where you have as few abortions as possible. I think it's deeply troubling that after reducing the number of abortions in this country, ironically through the Obama years, it did start ticking back up during the Trump years and actually really increased since 2020. I don't know whether that's a matter of the pandemic and people having greater gloom, greater fear of the future, less confidence about their ability to raise a child in a world that can be very scary. Or other factors. But, to me, my attitude is, that's the real measuring stick. How many are occurring and can you get that number to go down? Now, the great irony is that it's not like Obama's policies were trying to bring down the rate. And I don't think you can say the Trump administration's policies were trying to bring up the rate. I think we have to recognize what laws are in place. There are bigger factors going on beyond that. Having said that, I think the David French perspective that, well, actually, Obama was better on abortion than Trump, that's a bridge too far, my friend. I do not. Yes. I don't think you can, twist yourself into a pretzel to say, well, actually, Obama was pretty good on abortion. No, he wasn't. Let's not, you don't like Trump. Fine. I get that. But that strikes me as stretching it. So I'm not surprised by Trump's position. I find it kind of disappointing. I think pro-lifers can look at this and say, we've gotten everything we're probably going to get out of Trump. On the other hand, you got the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which is not nothing. In fact, is arguably the most significant accomplishment of the pro-life movement in 2 generations. But that having been said, I don't think if Trump is reelected, you're going to see a great deal of energy, effort, or time or political capital spent on reducing the number of abortions. And if you're a pro-lifer, I think you have to find that pretty darn disappointing.
It is disappointing. You want to see consistent conservative principle. The idea that the court said the issue belongs to the states is certainly accurate. The idea that there should be some sort of federal limit overall is certainly understandable, given the idea of infanticide and the longer the pregnancy goes on. I think the more people have a problem with it, and pro-lifers would say that's, from the time of conception. Politically speaking, Jim, I'm just constantly amazed, and I shouldn't be, at how bad Republicans are when they finally get what they want. They got control of the House, Senate, and the White House in 2017. All right, let's take care of Obamacare. Let's get it out of there. No idea what to do. And then it was just a complete debacle with ending up with the McCain thumbs down. They just didn't have a plan. Repeal. And then they never got anything that even they could agree on. And then after 50 years, Republicans were cheering in the streets, which they should have been, but they didn't have a plan to win over the argument as this went state to state. Meanwhile, Democrats were like, this is immediately getting on the ballot. This is going to drive turnout. This is going to help us in the midterms. And immediately in Michigan, same year it happened, constitutional amendment. Other states, Ohio, redder and redder state. And now they're going to have it in, I think, in Arizona this year, which is a big swing state. And they're trying to get it in other states as well. Democrats are evil on this issue, but they're organized and they have a plan that is working for them. And Republicans got caught very flat-footed on here. And I hope they have a way to fight back on this. But so far, they really haven't.
Yeah, if you ask a Democrat, should abortion be legal, they'll probably give you an emphatic yes. If you ask Republicans, they'll say no, right. No-ish. Bill Clinton said strong and wrong beats, weak and right. I think there's a certain amount of truth to that on this issue.
Maybe they thought they were never really sure they were going to get to that point, but you should have had a plan after 50 years on what to do. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And there's so many different ways to criticize the Biden administration over their handling of the situation in Israel and Gaza. Not only the shoulder to shoulder, we're buddies, joined at the hip here. We're going to fight Hamas until it's totally in the
as long as it takes, as Biden said, both overseas in Israel and here in the U.S. Yeah.
As long as it takes is apparently 6 months or less, because ever since the media narrative has shifted from how horrible the Hamas atrocities were to, oh man, there's not enough humanitarian aid getting in, or how long is this going to take you guys? The negative drumbeat on Israel has continued. It happens all the time, from the UN to the media and on and on and on. One of the issues, though, that keeps coming up, of course, especially from folks who say, no, we can't let this go to an immediate ceasefire and just let bygones be bygones, for a number of reasons. Not only that Hamas committed these atrocities and they've planned to do many more, but there are still hostages. There are still American hostages. And Hamas is now saying, well, there's not as many left alive as you thought. Doesn't mean that you don't keep blasting them until you get your hostages back, and really until Hamas is decimated. But over at the Dispatch, Jim, they're disputing the narrative that Biden has largely ignored the American hostages in Gaza, and they give a handful of examples over the 6 months, including right after the attacks and State of the Union. There was a reference, and there was a meeting in the White House in December. But I think your bigger takeaway here is that this defense actually proves in principle the original accusation against the Biden administration. The fact that you can only come up with a handful of occasions where there's been a public acknowledgement or mention of the hostages proves that this has not been on the front burner for this administration. And I think the most telling example of this, and this is also on the media, but also in the Biden administration, Jim, name one. Name one. If this administration and the current mainstream media really wanted this front and center, and for you to know who these people are, you would know at least one and probably more of the names. The fact that virtually no Americans, I would guess, can name any is a real indictment here.
Well, I can, but only because my distinguished and excellent colleague, Jessica Hornick, wrote about the hostages, the American hostages held by Hamas. Keith Siegel, Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Idan Alexander, Omer Nutra, and Sagoy Dekel-Chan. Forgive me if I mispronounce any of their names. My guess is, That's probably the first time most people listening to this podcast have heard those names. And so, look, I'm on good terms with the guys over at the Dispatch. I don't want to give them too much grief about this. And Alex Dimas, who writes this, is writing a fact check that is technically true, but I feel like leaves kind of a misleading impression. It all begins with a tweet from Bill Ackman. He's the guy who's been going after the colleges on anti-Semitism. And he says, I can't think of one example in the past 181 days where Biden has expressed concern for the American hostages. Tweeted this out on April 5th. Well, the Dispatch goes and finds multiple examples. First of all, he met with the hostages back in December, and they were able to find 3 release statements from that. So it is accurate to say, yes, Joe Biden has acknowledged the American hostages in the hands of Hamas. That having been said, I think we all know what it's like when an administration really wants to focus on an issue. Take a look at how much Biden talks about abortion. Take a look at how much Biden talks about the student loans. Take a look at how much Biden talks about criticism of Israel lately. Now look at how much Biden administration talks about the hostages. Very rarely, once every couple months. Usually it's a written statement. I don't think it's too harsh to say that this is not first and foremost in the mind of the president every single day, despite whatever he would tell us. We all have seen check-the-box journalism, and I think this counts. This such thing as check-the-box administration attention. Credit where it's due. I believe Kamala Harris will be meeting with some of the families of the hostages in the near future. But I strongly suspect that's probably because of political fears that this is going to turn into an issue that the administration has been, if not ignoring, downplaying. And just for any of us, look, you and I were really little during the Iranian hostage crisis under Jimmy Carter, but like that started Nightline. That was a huge deal to Americans. That was more hostages. And it was the storming of an embassy. There were very, powerful visuals, images of the hostages being held with hoods over their head and stuff like that. But again, it just feels like a suspiciously low level of media attention. And it just, again, you'd think you'd know these names. You'd think you would have seen these profile pieces. And I have wondered whether there was some sort of argument either from the administration or within media circles that coverage of it would enhance Hamas's leverage, that it would increase pressure on the administration to make concessions or pressure Israel to make concessions. But I still feel like there's something a little odd about this. I don't think you can say that that the coverage has been very high. I don't think you can say the administration's discussion of the American hostages has been very high. And oh, by the way, remember Biden said we're going to get every last American out of Afghanistan, and that did not occur either. So it's now this kind of recurring pattern of Americans overseas in danger, and it just doesn't get a heck of a lot of attention. Now, again, call me a crazy right-winger, but I have a sneaking suspicion if it was a Republican president, there were American hostages held overseas, you would see saturation coverage. And the failure to get those hostages returned would be seen as a major administration failure. And, I can't help but get the feeling that this is, out of an effort of like, God, we can't talk about this. It makes Biden look bad. And we're heading into a presidential election year. So if the Dispatch wants to call me a raving paranoid, I guess they could do that. And I don't mean, I just want to wrap them on the knuckles gently. Because yes, technically it is true that Biden has acknowledged the hostages, but he really hasn't paid the kind of attention that I think the issue deserves and that I think a normal president would get in normal circumstances.
No, I think you're right. And Andy McCarthy had said that the media is trying to avoid what happened to Jimmy Carter. They think the constant drumbeat, and it obviously did, hurt his reelection chances in 1980, and not knowing how soon the Americans would be released from captivity in Gaza, that could be a similar albatross around the neck of Joe Biden. And so they're not going to do that to him because they largely want him to be reelected. So, Jim, on that sobering note, we will call time for today, but we'll do it again tomorrow. See you then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast if you don't already, and get your friends to listen to us as well. We'd love to have them. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. They really are a huge, huge help to us. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Tuesday and join us again on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.